Chapter 13, A Fight to the Death. One night after dinner, Dub turned up a snowshoe rabbit. He dove at it and missed. In a second, the whole team was flying after it. They were joined in the chase by 50 huskies from a Northwest police camp nearby. The rabbit sped down the river, then turned off into a small creek. It ran lightly on the surface of the snow, but the dogs had to plow through the deep drifts by sheer strength. Buck led the pack of 60 dogs around bend after bend of the creek. His splendid body leaped forward in the moonlight, but the rabbit still ran ahead. Spitz was more experienced at this type of hunting, so he left the pack and cut across the narrow neck of land where the creek bent around. Soon he was in the path of the onrushing rabbit. Spitz leaped down from the bank, a white streak from above, onto a white streak going by. The rabbit could not turn. The dog pack was behind it. It met its end in Spitz's teeth. When Buck saw the rabbit snatched from him and the thrill of the chase ended by Spitz, he knew the time had come. He did not check his all-out run, but dove on into Spitz. Shoulder met shoulder, and the two went down in the powdery snow. Spitz got back on his feet, almost as though he had not been overthrown. He slashed Buck across the shoulder and leaped clear. Then they circled one another, snapping and snarling. The other dogs made short work of the rabbit, then silently arranged themselves in a circle around Buck and Spitz. Spitz had beaten all kinds of dogs in fights. He fought coldly and shrewdly. Buck rushed him again and again, but it was in vain. Every attack was defended easily, often with a parting slash that ripped Buck's shoulder. Buck then pretended to rush at Spitz's throat, but swerved to cut his shoulder. Spitz was too experienced for this tactic. He met Buck's rush with a slash that tore Buck's unguarded shoulder again. Then Spitz flashed back to circle around him. The fight was growing one-sided. Spitz was untouched when Buck streamed blood. The silent, wolfish circle waited to finish off whichever dog went down. As Buck grew winded, Spitz took to rushing him. Buck staggered to get his footing, but fell over. The circle of dogs seemed ready to attack, but Buck recovered himself almost in midair, and the awaiting dogs. Buck recovered himself almost in midair, and the awaiting dogs sat down again. Up to now, Buck had been fighting by instinct, but he could also fight with his brain now that he found himself in a desperate situation. He rushed Spitz again, as if trying the same throat but really the shoulder trick. At the last instant, he went in low, almost on the snow. His teeth broke Spitz's left hind leg. Spitz fought on 3 legs until Buck repeated the trick. With 2 broken legs, Spitz was doomed. Now Buck made a final rush, meeting Spitz shoulder to shoulder squarely. His teeth aimed for the snow-white throat and closed on it. Buck sprang back. The circle of dogs leaped forward. Buck, the champion, watched without pity. This was the way of the North. Kill or be killed. Chapter 11. Buck makes himself lead dog. The next morning, Francois found Buck covered with wounds and Spitz missing. He knew instantly that the fight to the finish had taken place at last. "That's some dog, that Spitz," he said. "Best lead dog I ever see. Great fighter, too. See, wounds all over Buck, Perrault." "Not as good a fighter as Buck," pointed out Perrault, "or he would be here, not Buck. Maybe for the best. Now we make good time. No more trouble because of Spitz." Francois started to harness the dogs. He took Solex from his usual place and brought him to the front of the line, but Buck had placed himself there. "What do you think, Buck?" asked Francois with a laugh. "Just because you kill Spitz, you can be a leader? Go away, back in line." Instead, Buck sprang at Solex in a fury, driving him back to his original place. Then he stood again at the head. He would not budge until Francois dragged him away by the scruff of his neck. Solex was moved up again, but he did not like it and showed plainly that he was afraid of Buck. As soon as Francois turned to fasten the harness, Buck snarled at Solex, who was eager to leave and did so in a hurry. Francois was no longer amused. He picked up a club and waved it at Buck. Buck retreated slowly and allowed Solex to be brought forward for a third time. Francois harnessed him as lead dog. After all the dogs except Buck were in the traces, Francois called him. Buck stayed where he was. When Francois tried to grab him, he retreated just out of reach. Francois threw down his club to show that no beating was intended, but it was not a whipping that Buck was concerned about. He had earned the lead position. He would not be content with less. Perrault and Francois chased Buck for almost an hour. They threw clubs at him, but never connected. They swore at him, and he snarled back. By not running out of the camp, Buck showed that he was ready at any moment to be harnessed, but only at the head of the team. Perrault took another look at his watch and swore. They should have been on the trail over an hour ago. Francois grinned sheepishly and shrugged his shoulders. He unharnessed Solex and returned him to his old place. Then he called Buck, and with a big smile, Buck came to him promptly. Buck had made himself lead dog. Buck took up his new duties with enthusiasm. Where judgment, quick thinking, and quick action were needed, Buck soon showed himself the superior of Spitz. One of the first things he did was to whip the team back into obedience. Dave and Solex did not care who was in charge of the team. They did their work and wanted no interference. But the other dogs had developed bad habits through Buck's rebellion against Spitz. Buck, however, showed them at once that the situation had changed. Pike was punished for not pulling with all his strength. Then Joe was beaten, and Billy too. All the dogs were whipped except Dave and Solex. In a few days, the old team spirit was back. The team pulled again like one dog. Their morale rose, and Francois and Perrault were happy and amazed at the speed that Buck got from the team. At the Rink Rapids, 2 native huskies, Teak and Kuna, were added. The speed with which Buck brought them in took Francois's breath away. He thought he had seen everything in lead dogs, but Buck's ability to rule and his great intelligence and good judgment were new wonders to him. The trail was in excellent condition with no new fallen snow. Thus, on the trip back over the 30-mile river, they covered in one day what had taken them 10 days before. At Skagway, they took count. For 14 days, they had averaged 40 miles a day. Buck had led a record-breaking run. Do you want to